Good evening, everybody. I would like to call this special meeting of Kimberley City Council for Wednesday, December the 7th, held here on the homelands of the Ktunaxa peoples to order. Welcome, everybody. Staff that are here tonight, gallery that is here tonight, and everybody who may be watching live and or unlive on YouTube over the course of the next week. The primary purpose of the meeting tonight is to go through other kind of the next elements of the financial plan. But ahead of that, we actually have a delegation that we will get into momentarily. So, Maurice, do we have any late items tonight?
There is no late items.
Hearing none, could I have a mover to adopt? Councillor Royer, thank you. And Councillor McGuire seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. All right, no minutes to approve tonight, so we'll get right into it. We have the building condition assessment as presented by Stevenson Engineering. Welcome. I assume, Lawrence, you will be providing the presentation? All right, yeah, cool. Take it away.
Now, so yes.
Take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint yet?
Not quite.
No?
Yeah, just give it a second.
Okay, so we kind of did a little bit of a combined presentation. Some of you saw some of this previously, and then we've included also the last three buildings that we've done here in the fall. The next slide. So just to kind of review what a building condition assessment, the purpose of it and kind of what it covers, it's to give you an idea of what your capital needs are for time period. So in our case, we looked at the next 20 years for your buildings. We looked at everything that included the site, the architectural, both exterior and interior of the building, the structural systems, mechanical and electrical components. We considered a couple things, needed repairs, ongoing maintenance, and life cycle replacements that are coming up in the buildings. We did give some consideration to changes in code, and particularly with regard to accessibility for the buildings. We didn't take the approach that the buildings were going to be brought up completely to current code because they met the code when they were built. So that a lot of the things are grandfathered in. The next slide. So we did site visits this past summer and in November. When we come to site, we interview staff at each facility. We have previous drawings and documents that were related to the building, and we interview and kind of do a extensive photo documentation of the existing conditions. The next slide. So the three buildings that we did in the fall were the Kimberley Aquatic Center, which is one of your newer facilities at 15 years, the Curling Club, which is at 59 years, and the Public Works, which it's a little kind of a conglomerate of the buildings. So the oldest portions are now 72 years old, but it was kind of a span there of about 10, 15 years with some later additions. Next slide. And your two arenas, the Kimberley Civic Center, which is now 60 years old, and the Marysville Arena, which is 48. As some of you know, the Marysville Arena started out as an outdoor rink that later had a roof put onto it. The next slide. So looking at these five buildings together, the next 20 years, there's a capital needs of $12,795,000 in total. And this will be a running total as we do more of your facilities. This will grow. The dollar does not include any costs for major renovations or additions to the building. Doesn't cover any changes to overcome any deficiencies for space or functionality. So it's really just keeping the building status quo, keeping it running, replacing things as they need to, giving it some, fresh coat of paint and new carpeting, things like that over time. We broke it down to short, mid, and long term. And the next slide will kind of go a little bit more detail to that. So the immediate items are kind of some studies that we've identified. Many of the buildings, there were accessibility studies that we recommended. There's a few cases where there's some structural studies to get done as well. Short term is the next 5 years, and then the midterm is years 5 through 10, and then the long term is years 10 through 20. So the way this works is that we did some prioritization. So the next 5 years, some of those things are the ones that we recommend. If for some reason some of these get deferred, they obviously go into the next 10-year, the next 5 year cycle. So there's always impacts to deferring certain things. The next slide. So the slide on the left is kind of just where the money goes in the first 5 years. The one at the bottom is kind of the conglomerate of the next 20 years. So you can see that it's split kind of amongst architectural items, electrical, mechanical, structural pieces. So it's not just one thing. There are things that kind of go through life cycles on a regular basis. So over a 20-year period, things like paint and carpet hit usually twice. Usually light fixtures have a 20-year life expectancy as well. So some of these things will always be kind of ongoing as they come up. We gave everything a rating within how good it was. Generally, when we call something in the reports acceptable, that means it's more or less doing adequate, service to the building. It's doing not too major deficiencies, and we do recommend that it gets pushed to the next 5 years maximum if it's past its life cycle. Excuse me. Next slide. So each building has unique capital needs. So like the aquatic center, the lockers have a tendency to rust out because of the moisture. So those are unique to that building. We've identified quite a bit of work to get done in the aquatic center for its filtration system. It could be millwork, it could be paint and carpet again. So it's really very specific to each building. And like I said, there are some pieces that may have to get replaced twice in the life cycle. Next slide. So we've identified this kind of breaks out a little bit by the first 3 facilities that we did this past fall. So there's the comparison of what replacing the existing building is by a similar building of similar square feet. So it's not exactly replicating the building, but it's building a building of equal size and content. So that's kind of where we come up with this number. It's kind of a square foot cost that's all in. That includes mechanical, electrical, architectural systems. Doesn't include any design fees. Doesn't include any site issues. So it's just strictly the building itself. So the reason we do this is because it gives you a comparison of what a replacement may cost compared to what you have to spend in the next 20 years. So you always want to kind of keep track of those relationships. The next slide. And this is a similar thing for the 2 arenas. Again, we kind of took a generic arena. Both these buildings are about the same size and square footage. We took an arena that had, some sort of bleacher system in both of them. We didn't actually get into, how many seats and things like that. So there was a reason why we didn't do that, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But basically, a replacement facility, if you're looking at these together, would be about $19 million as a target. And then the value of which you have to do next 20 years is about 6.8 million. Then next slide. So the reason we come up with these replacement costs is that there's a standard element that's called the facility condition index, This was actually developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers about 25 years ago as a way of benchmarking buildings to each other. So um, it's a way to see how comparatively your buildings are doing and how they rank with each other. So um, it can be a little shocking to people not familiar with this because it kind of starts to it's pretty conservative. So if you've got something that's over 30% of the value, then it falls into critical condition. Good is really brand new building, so that's kind of like a new car. It lasts as a new car for a year, and then things start to happen to it if you don't maintain it. So it quickly moves into that fair category and the poor category. Fair is not a bad place to be. As buildings age, that's always kind of the goal, is to stay there as long as possible. Poor is when you've deferred enough items that it starts to kind of add up. Critical is where you really start to think that, how much investment do we want to make in this building, and is it old? Does it make sense anymore as far as its original program? So it's kind of a ratio, and it's just a quick way of comparing buildings to each other. There's a lot of variables to this, but this is kind of keeping it pretty simple. The next slide. So if we looked at all these buildings together, the 5-year FCI score, the only one that does well is the Aquatic Center, and that's largely because of its age. The other ones are all kind of in the poor category, and the Civic Center has quite a bit it's in the critical status. And then the 20-year FCI calculation is if you didn't do any investment in the next 20 years, that's where the score would be at the end of that 20-year period. So that's unlikely, but it can kind of give you an idea how things further deteriorate if you don't put investment into your buildings. The next slide. So here's a comparison of a couple buildings with the 5-year, as I mentioned. So the curling club is a good example where it's kind of in the poor category, but if things start to get deferred out to the 20-year line, that's when it starts to go into the critical condition. Whereas the other buildings stay in this area here. So these are the breakdowns of the 5, the 10, and the 20-year. So the idea here is to spend as much of the money as you can within the 5-year cycles, and then not let things kind of deteriorate too far. Is kind of the concept here. The next slide. This is the other two buildings, so it kind of gives an idea. There's quite a few significant issues with the Civic Center. Accessibility is a big one, so there's a lot of obstacles there for getting that building accessible for a lot of public use. So that had a big factor in here. And generally, I would say that these are getting old enough now that you wouldn't design them the same way again. Like there was a certain style that was done in the 50s and 60s, and kind of things have come a long way. Sustainability design and things like that are all things that have changed how these facilities get done. Not to say that the Civic Center can be reused in some form as part of a renovation project. That is a possibility, but this is just kind of really high level review of these buildings. The next slide. So the priorities that we give everything in our report, this is kind of the 5 categories. So potentially critical, so we put that to years 2. Not yet critical, we want to see those happen through the next 3 to 5 years. Recommended are ones that could get deferred out, and 5 are kind of things that there's code issues or it just doesn't work anymore. There's pumps in the building that are broken and they were never taken out. The next slide. So here's an example of how that might look. So this is the Aquatic Center. So category 2 is things that we recommended next few years. So that's kind of a range of things that are happening here. There's boilers, there's pool distribution piping, there's even things like ceiling paint and things like that. So even there's some evidence that some of this stuff is failing. That's why it kind of got put into that category. Um, but there are things here that are more important than others. So like the bigger mechanical systems should probably take a priority over some of the finishes. But the longer finishes deteriorate, it starts to escalate a little bit. So these are all the two categories. If you go to the next slide, it kind of shows you the mid and long term. So again, it's kind of the types of things that we earmarked and the costs. So not to get lost in the weeds here, but this is all in the reports. This is just kind of a highlight of some of the items that might be included. Next slide. So when we look at these buildings for a 20-year period, it's really only helpful for the most part to look at the next 5 years because we really like to say that buildings should be looked at every 5 to 6 years. Um, you don't want to go too much further than that because then things start to pop up that you're not paying attention to. So 5-year outlook kind of helps you budget the most important things, keeps your buildings running better. Um, the 20-year outlook is helpful just to see where things might go if you defer things. Um, and then it's a good way to compare your buildings to each other so you can help prioritize which building should be the focus of your money. And then there are things to consider as far as risk factors. Excuse me. So the roof or a boiler, if that fails, um, the building could have to shut down until it gets replaced. Flooring and paint are things that have a lower risk, so those could get slid to the next 5-year period. They're not as critical. Things might not look so good, but you could let them go a little longer if you needed to. The next slide. So here's an example of this is the curling club. So the next, if we did the 20-year outlook, the curling club falls into the critical condition. But if we spend what's earmarked for the next 5 years, it stays kind of pretty much in the middle of the poor condition, which, like I said, isn't so bad because if you look at how these bar charts work, um, you know the it gets bigger as the buildings age. So the good and fair are pretty small. There's a pretty big range here of distance in the poor category, but then once you cross over to the critical, due to the age and condition, things like that, this is kind of really where you might have to start thinking about um, a replacement or a major renovation. Next slide. So the other impact to consider with this is again the curling club, is the impacts of spending capital that we recommend versus underfunding things. So, we always like to say 100% funding is fantastic. Uh, Rarely happens. Nobody has that much money to put in all their buildings. So you're really usually kind of in these scenarios where you may only have 75% of the needed budget that you could put into a building. These are the impacts as you underfund. So 50% starts to have you can still stay in the poor category with any of these three. It's when you hit 25% or less that it really starts to push your building into negative territory. The next slide. So kind of the overall concept here, this is a generic graph, is that as the buildings age, the condition does go down. But if you keep up with the building, there's that opportunity to kind of make sure that slide is much less. If you let things defer too much, you wind up with these huge dips, and then you have some large capital need all of a sudden that likely you wouldn't be able to do. So, kind of don't want to put yourself into that situation. Next slide. So again, this is kind of shows you the 100% funding compared to the 75, the 50, and the 25. So it's a relatively flat curve for the 100%. Things still go up, but less drastically, and then it starts to really go up quite a bit once you get into the 25. Excuse me. Next slide. So, considerations that play into this a little bit is your town, the demographics of it. We were looking at quite a bit of recreation facilities in this cycle. You've got a fairly young population, 44.6. You're a recreationally based community, so there's skiing and there's a lot of outdoor interest. There's quite a bit of people that are in the 15 to 64 year category. Um, Current population is about 8,000, and you're having some pretty steady growth over time. So some towns we look at, that's not the case, that they're actually, been pretty flat or they're declining. But in your case, your population is expected to grow. And that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking down the road. Um, we've been told that it's becoming a little bit more popular as a retirement destination. So that has considerations too, as you have senior interests that are going to come to play that may not be programmed right now. And then there is a tourist element to this whole thing. Is there a way that your facilities can bring more tourists in? And then you have the hockey, the pro hockey league as well. Next slide. So the next steps, I know that you're going to be launching a review of your recreational plan, the master plan. Um, the When it gets down to buildings, uh, we have something that we call a program plan that we develop. Looks at a facility and kind of just says, what's here now, what doesn't work anymore, what does the building need to function and for its current needs of 2022 or the next 5 years even, and then also the age. So kind of gets you to some conceptual ideas about a building. Is it time to replace it? Is it time to renovate it or make an addition? Um, can an older facility be repurposed to some other use once it gets recycled with a replacement, perhaps? So there's a couple of things that play that they're all interlinked. Usually, we like to see things repurposed. The only exception to that is if you're running out of land and you need to use the existing site, perhaps. And then there's the site constraints. Is an expansion possible where it is? Do you have to find another site someplace in town? Um, and then how long should you wait? What's and then the value of reinvestment you have to put in? How do you choose those next 20 years carefully so that you're not spending money only to have the building come down in 15 years, perhaps? Next slide. So, kind of the little bit of each building. The Aquatic Center is out of this grouping of buildings, it's still got 7 years remaining, but it does have the capital um, that we've identified. 73% of it needs to happen in the next 10 years, so that's pretty significant. Um, but that will keep it in a better condition. So that's important to know. The curling club only has about 25 years of remaining life, um, and 65% of it identified is supposed to be the next 5 years. So some of that is dealing with your brine lines and slab for the rink itself. So things like that. They once they get to a certain age, they can fail, and then you can't keep the ice in good condition. Things like that. So there is going to be a day that happens, but you might not want to put all that money into it if you really think that you might replace this building. Public Works, it probably these facilities kind of are often the problem child of most towns. Um, they're in poor condition. Even with the reinvestment, it's going to stay that way. 68% of the investment is in the next 5 years, so there's quite a bit there. Some of the pieces of the buildings are quite old, and it's kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge there. So it might be time to consider some replacements of some of that maybe on that site even. So we just did a similar look for the town of Pincher Creek. We developed a program plan for their public works facility for a new facility that consolidated 3 buildings into one facility. So that kind of stuff is what you probably just need to start looking at. The next slide. And for your 2 arenas, again, there's issues with both of them. They both have the same problem with the slab and the brine lines at some point are going to be out there. The Marysville, it wasn't really built to be kind of a building. It was kind of like got you to a building by putting a roof over it. So there are some structural issues with that building. So there is some logic to consideration of putting 2 ice sheets next to each other in the same facility. There's economies of scale that go with that, lower operational costs, there's program efficiencies so that you don't have to build everything twice. So that's something that I think that really we would recommend you start to consider. You might even consider putting the curling club as part of this. And maybe there's a master plan that has to be phased, but at least it's something to start to think about. Next slide. So that's kind of these other factors I was talking about. Quite a bit has to happen. You have to have some public engagement with the people in the town just to see, what everybody would like to see, so they have some opportunity for feedback. The building program planning I was talking about as far as what the facilities are lacking or need. And there's some synergies that you can kind of build on. And then the goals and objectives for the building. And then kind of the feasibility studies of what this might cost, the site analysis and a conceptual design with some conceptual pricing. So these are kind of the still pretty high level types of review, but these would be the next steps to start to see, are you going to replace something 15 years, 20 years down the road? I think that's the last, no, one more slide, I think. Oh, no, that's the last one I have then. Sorry. So I know it's a lot of information, but I think to give you some good news, I think you're not any worse than some other towns. There are some that are better, but they have newer facilities. British Columbia has a lot of 1950s and 1960s hockey rinks. They all got built at the same time. They're all kind of in their last twilight years, so it's something that every town is kind of considering. Enderby's got a curling rink that dates from 1924, so it could be worse. There's some really old facilities out there.
Oh, great! That makes us feel so much better, Lawrence.
So it's every city, even in Vancouver, we work for them as well. There's always more need than there is money, so that's always the case. But there are things that can be done with these buildings just to make sure that you don't fall too far behind.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor McBain, go ahead.
It's just more of a comment, but thanks, Lawrence, for putting this together. I just thought one of the really telling, and you did touch on it. Your narrative was quite good, but I think one of the most telling sets of data is I think it's trying to see what slide it is. It's the one right before the demographic considerations, the impacts on average FCI. When I look at that and I'm seeing, allocating 100% funding and really on the FCI ratio, it barely gets you, as you mentioned, it doesn't get you out of fair. It keeps you in fair. And I think the message there is, we can't turn back the years that these things have on them. And we have to really start thinking about looking at consolidation. I was just I had it on my mental notes to include that curling rink into some kind of conceptual design like you were talking about, Lawrence. I think we're a town we are limited in land. There's potential for some other land there with, you know, if we can get some things figured out on reclamation side of stuff. But to me, you know, it almost looks like risk management from this point seems to make a lot of sense, and you know, really starting exploring what type of options would be viable. You know, the consolidation of buildings, even consolidating public works into you know, a broader recreational facility. But no, I think this. I just wanted to comment, Lawrence. I think this is really really great data. I love seeing you use Corps of Engineers stuff. I was a former employee with them, so that's cool. A little shout out to USACE. But yeah, no, this is really helpful, and I like the expansion of this report to include some of those other buildings too. So much to think about. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor McBain. Anybody else? Comments? Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
I guess I remember when the arena was built. I remember when the Marysville Arena was built. I remember how many people fought for the curling rink and the swimming pool. The bottom line is that when you've lived a long time, you've watched them all decay as well. And it's interesting to me to see the state of affairs, because it's really easy for us to walk in and enjoy the service of the hockey game or this celebration of an event. But boy, when you get behind the scenes and you look at the cracks in the concrete and you see one of the lights dangling, you know, so many things that we need glass, we need new brine plants. There's just so many things behind the scenes that as a taxpayer, you just take for granted it's always going to be there, and it's wearing out.
Thank you for those comments. I guess I've got a couple. First of all, with respect to the overall assessment, I mean, this is very similar to the you know, asset management assessment we had done a number of years ago on infrastructure, and it really came up with this number that represented our infrastructure deficit, and that's kind of what we're looking at with this as well. I think the good news is, as Councillor McBain said, it's data, it's hard data, it's facts, irrefutable facts for the most part, that we can use to build on a plan. If I'm not mistaken, like a lot of things in local government, the degree of effort that is put into maintaining just assets of any kind is directly proportional to granting opportunities that come available. And those granting opportunities are far and few between, and they represent a lot of competition when they finally do come out. And so we end up in this cycle of wait till it breaks and fix what broke, as opposed to, you know, investing, you know, for the long-term good of the assets. I think what this does is it informs, or has an opportunity to inform, the master plan that I think is underway. Nicole, can you kind of comment on that? Kind of, you know, is this a bridge to coming up with a master plan for council to be able to consider?
Thank you, Mayor McCormick. Yes, we plan to release the documents for tender for the Parks and Facilities Master Plan in January or February of the new year.
Right. And, you know, once council, you know, gets a look at, you know, kind of the big picture, it will give us an opportunity to prioritize and take a look at, you know, and in the meantime, we can engage in some consultation with the community. We probably have enough you know, data to at least begin that, so that when that plan does come out, we have an opportunity to start talking about what the priorities are going to be, because it's a lot of money for a small town like ours, and we just can't do everything at once. We're going to have to pick and choose what we do and over what period of time we do it. Go ahead, Councillor McGuire.
Yeah, just looking at some of the reserve totals, especially for the Civic Center compared to the replacement cost. It makes me wonder about grant opportunities for new buildings and whether it would actually save money in the long term to be looking at having a master plan or having some sort of drawings in place that are shelf ready for grant opportunities.
Fair comment. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you. Ultimately, what doing these plans will allow us to do is to align ourselves to be shovel ready for when grants become available. We can find elements within each one of these facilities that become fundable, attractive elements that the upper tier government levels would like to fund. And then that allows us to put our reserves to elements that may not be as attractive for them to fund. It may be deemed maintenance related and they say, well, that's something that you are responsible for the replacement of. So the city can then budget accordingly and then rely on those government dollars for some of the larger things, energy efficiencies, turning buildings into more of a green type projects are green related and we're not having such a negative effect both on the environment long term and operationally. So
Thank you for that. I think I'm not sure what the total amount is that we've sunk into that civic center, but it's north of $1 million in the last, probably 7 or 8 years, I think. Similarly, the curling rink, really close to $1 million was put into basically rescuing it from the scrap heap about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. So we have been doing a little bit of investment in the buildings, but it has been a result of, catastrophic failure and just trying to keep the facilities open. Further? Any further comments, Lawrence?
No, I think that's pretty much it. So I know this is a lot to digest. We're going to continue on doing some more buildings for you next couple of years, so you'll have a better view of your whole portfolio. But I think some of these do make sense to, start to think that maybe they don't have to always be individual buildings. So you have to kind of reimagine what they might be in the next reiteration.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much for the presentation this evening. We appreciate it, and undoubtedly we will chat again.
Sounds good. All right, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Any last comments on this topic, Nicole? It's okay if you don't. Oh, okay. Hang on. Councilor McBain, go ahead.
So, Nicole, so you said the master plan is going out to tender February?
correct, that's the hope.
Okay, what's the expected turnaround time between when that goes out and final report? Do we have milestones or anything like that laid out in our proposal?
Yes, they are established within the proposal. We're just working with senior management to make sure that's on target with what they're looking for.
Do we have a ballpark?
I would hope to see it completed by the end of the summer,
Okay,
beginning of fall.
okay, thank you.
All right, excellent. There was no motion or business to come out of that. Next up, we have the 2023 to 2027 capital and non-capital project plan. So this is timely. While we're on the topic of capital, let's just roll right into what's happening this next year. Jim, did you want us to kind of do the motions as we go through the presentation? Okay, awesome. Perfect. So the first motion on the floor is that council receive the capital and non-capital plan as attached to the CFO's report. Councillor McGuire moves, Councillor Karen seconds. Discussion. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we've got a few members of staff in the gallery here today. Nicole, you've all met. She's the manager of Parks and Facilities. We've got Jane over here, who's the projects manager. Rob is the manager of utilities. And we've got the chief back here as well. And of course, Maurice and Scott. So the idea behind having all these folks here, these guys are the experts on the projects that are in this plan. They give me the information, I feed it into this plan and communicate it to you. But if there are any questions about any of the projects in here, this is the opportunity. These guys will be able to answer any question you got, I'm pretty sure.
Pretty sure?
Positive. I'm
Boy,
positive.
what's an endorsement, guys?
Okay. Yeah, and Nick Morissette, the senior manager of operations, said intended to be here as well, but he's away sick this evening, unfortunately. So, but Nick had a lot to do with putting this plan together. We were finalizing things on Saturday, so thank him for that. So there are the three resolutions that we've got for tonight. The first one was just the receiving the plan for information. Then I'm going to be looking for council's approval to include the projects as presented in the 2023 to 2027 5-year financial plan. And then the last one is amending year 2 of the current 2022 to 2026 5-year financial plan. And we'll talk a bit more about the purpose for that as we get into the presentation here. We'll just move on to the introduction slide. It's not a PowerPoint, it's just a PDF, so it's probably easiest just to scroll through on your iPads if you have them. I've got a few hard copies printed as well if somebody'd prefer to look at that. You'd like that? Okay.
Either that or provide cheaters.
So the introduction on the next page there just talks about the purpose of the plan, which is really to provide council with information on the projects proposed to be completed over the next 5 years. Just so the council can make informed decisions on which projects warrant inclusion in the bylaw. We need to have the 5-year financial plan adopted by May 15th. So this is really, there are going to be changes between now and May 15th, I anticipate, whether that's due to newer, better information becoming available. Quite often there's grant programs that come out with short triggers. So if we've got a project in the 5-year financial plan that a project is eligible for, we may modify the financial plan because of that as well.
So Jim, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Just to point out to council that Pam Walsh and Troy Pollock are also here virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome, guys.
So the idea behind having this presentation, it's a little odd to have a meeting on Wednesday, as you realize, but we really wanted to get the capital rolling by having this meeting on the 7th. If council moves the recommendation following presentation of this report, we'll bring the 5-year financial plan bylaw amendment back on the 12th. I guess it would be December 12th. If it receives first 3 readings there, we'll bring it back for adoption on January 9th. And that way the projects will be formally approved. We can go out for tender knowing that council has approved those projects and the budgets they're in. The idea behind having a 5-year financial plan is so that we can continue to work under that plan in year 2, despite the fact that the bylaw won't be adopted until May 15th of that year. But a year like this in particular, as we get into the plan here, you'll see that there have been some significant increases to the budgets that were approved in the current 5-year plan. So just as an example, the Jim Ogilvie Way project, as you've probably seen in the report here, there was a budget of 2.5 million due to inflationary increases that bumped up by $1.7 million. So we have authority in the plan to spend that 2.5, but the 1.7 is in addition. So by doing that amendment, it gives us the authority to spend the full amount and to issue the tender for that project. So we'll flip to the next page. And there's a number of summary documents here, and it's really just to kind of give a high-level overview of different aspects of the plan. So the first one I've got here is a summary by fund. So over the next 5 years, we've got $135.7 million of planned spending and capital, which is significant. As noted under that table, the spending in years 2024, 5, and 6 are related to the planned construction of the wastewater treatment plant. So that skews these numbers a bit. But even if you pull that $95 million planned for that facility out of there, we're still looking at over $40 million of capital spending over the next 5 years. So $8 million a year. really aggressive capital plan. That some of that's dependent on capital, but there's a lot of projects in there, and there's a good reason for it. I mean, the building condition assessment presentation we just sat through, we've had condition assessments completed for pavement, for example. We're doing CCTV inspections of our sanitary sewer lines. So it's, again, it's all about kind of staying ahead of the maintenance curve on this stuff and not letting it get to the point where it's, a catastrophic failure. We need to spend the money and it might not necessarily have it. So the next slide.
So Jim,
Yep.
it's probably worthwhile pointing out, just for context, that our amortization for the year is roughly $4 million on these assets, which means that we have to spend a minimum of $4 million just to stay even. We don't make any headway on any of the infrastructure deficit unless we're spending more than the $4 million. And I think at $8 million, that's a reasonable number to be able to not only get the work done, but start continuing to dig into that deficit that we've been working at for so long now.
Quite right. The latest draft of the AMIP, which is the Asset Management Investment Plan that defines our infrastructure deficit and makes recommendations on annual investment, was at $12 million a year. And that's, with the way the construction costs are increasing, that's, that number was produced probably 6 or 8 months ago, that with these 60% increases, that could be up to 20 million by now. But yeah, so I mean, we need to continue to do what we can do with the money we have. We'd love to do everything that these condition assessment reports say that we need to do in the years we need to do them. But as Lawrence mentioned in the previous presentation, it's just, it really isn't practical. We're not the only ones that don't have the money to do everything that we need to do when we need to do it. So the next page is a listing of significant projects. So I've just gone through, there's, as you've seen in the annual capital project plans, there's dozens of projects in each year. So I've just pulled the significant ones. So I've used a number of $300,000 plus and pulled them all out for each year, the 5-year financial plan. So we've got some big projects in here. Some of the bigger projects we do are related to reconstruction of roads. We reconstructed a number of roads over the last number of years. The largest road reconstruction project we have in the 5-year plan is Jim Ogilvie Way, from the rails to trails to 304 Street. That's comprised of reconstructing the road, repaving the underground utilities, so water, sewer, and storm. And there's also an active transportation plan, a path associated with that. So there's $4 million for that project alone. And with the exception of the active transportation plan, I think we've applied for a grant of $200,000 or $300,000 for that. That's all coming from reserves. Just to put that in context, we put about roughly $6 million a year, every year, into reserves. That money doesn't go into reserves, sit there and build. We're constantly spending that money. So by the end of this 5-year plan, just due to some of the inflationary increases that we've seen, some of the reserves are getting really skinny, sewer in particular. So we're really going to need to keep an eye on the reserves over the next few years, and hopefully we're going to get some breaks on the pricing for some of these projects in the coming years.
Really, really glad to see Jim Ogilvie Way on the list finally for the coming year.
Yeah.
I think that staff have done an outstanding job of identifying kind of where the priorities are for roads in particular. And, for a town that has a lot of tourists, like visitors that come to town, roads create an impression of the community. And it's really important that the major kind of roads around town are up to par. And this particular, piece of road is really heavily used. And it's probably one of the worst that we have in town as well. So it's really good to see that on the list.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work on asset management planning. I mentioned the pavement condition assessment that we had done. I mentioned that previously. So there's these recommendations in here. There's some science behind them. So the operations department is going back to these asset management documents and picking roads where it makes sense to put the money in. There may be roads that are in worse shape than some of these, but they're to the point where they're not going to get any worse. The projects that are in here are the ones where it allows us to stay ahead of that maintenance curve. So we don't have that, you know, a paved road turning it back into a gravel road and having to reconstruct the whole thing. So it's really nice to have those documents to kind of look back to and point to guide, inform the capital plan. So if there'll be some opportunities through the course of the presentation, but if there are any projects that you see that you do have questions on, certainly, Councillor McBain.
No, I just think to your point, you know, looking down at 2024, you know, when we start bringing the rinks into it, and it just goes kind of directly to your point, Jim, of risk management, using infrastructure as an analogy for our buildings, you know, risk managing what we can right now, but replacing what needs to be replaced, you know, rather than, you know, continuing to just put Band-Aids on our roads. We have done a good job. I mean, Fourth Avenue is another great example of, you know, you just have to bite the bullet and get these things done. So just wanted to point that out looking ahead. I think everybody now should be, you know, really questioning and thinking about, you know, throwing good money at possibly bad. So.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And roads, water, and sewer, I think that we really have done a good job on. You mentioned Fourth and Jerry Sorensen Way, Norton Ave. I mean, we've done a lot of big road projects in the last 4, 5, 6 years, and the building condition assessments, the BCAs on the facilities is going to be a common theme through the presentation here, just because of the fact that we're finally quantifying the deferred maintenance on those facilities. You don't see a lot of big numbers in here for the facilities, with the exception of the Civic Center. And I'll speak a little bit more to that later on, but in future plans, once we, you know, start to pull that information in, once we have that parks and facilities, recreation facilities master plan to feed into the BCAs, you know, that'll really help inform where that money should be going. And that, you know, we're going to have to start prioritizing those projects in with the water and sewer. And it's not just the rec facilities. There's going to be a study coming forward on the fire department as well that I believe the chief will be bringing forward early in the new year. So that's another piece of the puzzle as well. So again, the biggest project on this list here is the wastewater treatment plant. We did receive approval for the borrowing portion of that project, as I think most people are aware, through the referendum letter of assent process. It was held in conjunction with the elections this year. So the grant portion is the next hurdle that we're waiting on for that. So the next slide, road program summary, number 5, page number 5. Again, it's just what I'm trying to do here is just to show council a bit of a snapshot of what we are doing with roads over the next 5 years here. So we've got between, and most of these, just about all of them have underground infrastructure associated with them as well. You'll see that there's an annual road rehabilitation budget that starts out at $380,000 in 2023, and operations is ramping that up a little bit each year. That's primarily for projects where we can just go in and repave, just paint it black. There's no underground infrastructure that needs to be done. Whereas the rest of these projects, the major reconstructions, they involve, in most cases, water infrastructure, storm, sanitary sewer, and in some cases, the active transportation projects that were identified in the plan that was produced last year. So again, I mean, $16.5 million proposed for these projects over the next 5 years. So significant
Roberts.
investment. No, I don't. That's not the plan at the moment here. There's a Yeah, yeah, and that's a grant dependent project. So we're hoping for a $727,000 grant to do that. Hopefully we'll find out about that in the not too distant future here. Yeah. So the next slide is the fleet replacement summary. And is the council members that saw the previous iteration of the AMIP, the Asset Management Investment Plan, the fleet was ranked the lowest as far as condition in that document. I think it had 18% life left in our fleet. We've made huge strides in the last 4 or 5 years, I would say, replacing some of the bigger pieces of equipment and also getting rid of the 20, 25-year-old pickups, that kind of thing. Upgrading to equipment that's more efficient, that we're not having to, it's not in the shop all the time getting fixed. So over the next 5 years, we're investing just about $3.5 million in the fleet as well. The biggest chunk of that is the replacement of the fire engine at $820,000.
When-
And
Jim, when
Yep.
when we hear the term fleet, most people think of trucks and cars. And that's not, well, I mean, there's a few of those in here, but we're talking about all of the equipment that our staff use to get their job done. These are productivity tools. And it's really, really important that we keep up with the tools that staff need to get the job done. And it's really good to see the investments that are being made here.
yeah, absolutely. And you're quite right. A better title for that slide might be fleet and equipment, because it's not just things with 4 wheels and an engine. We're talking about trailers, Zambonis, boom trucks, that kind of thing, UTVs, utility vehicles. So yeah, these really are the tools that allow our employees to do their jobs. So on to the next page, where we talk about grant, debt, and our third party funded projects. So these are the projects in the 5-year financial plan where some of the funding is dependent on the receipt of grants, the acquisition of debt, or contributions from a third party. So we talked about the Plattsville parking lot a few minutes ago. So the grant requested column in this chart, those include grants that we've applied for and not heard back from yet. And some of these projects, we haven't applied for the grant yet. But in order to get the projects done as planned, we're waiting for those opportunities to come up. Those are the ones that are a little further on in the plan. So if we don't receive approval for the ones that have been applied for, or if those opportunities don't come up for the ones that we're waiting for the grant programs, they're going to have to be bumped further down in the plan in order to get those done. The biggest one of
Good.
those. Sorry.
Councilor McBain?
Yep.
I guess Nick's not here. I don't know, maybe if Rob could talk about this, just the Plattsville parking lot revitalization. If this grant isn't successful, is this something that maybe would get revisited on, just thinking about in terms of capacity? And we don't have a lot of areas to work with. I start thinking about, if this didn't go through and it stayed in the condition that it is there opportunities for, like a multi-deck type of facility or something like that? I hate to say it, but, even like a paid parking type of thing, as the city grows, these are the types of infrastructure that, towns that are growing and have a small central core, like Banff in particular, is something that maybe we would revisit if we weren't successful. Sorry, Rob.
Thanks, Councillor McBain. We're working on a downtown revitalization strategy. So parking, roadways, all that stuff will be part of that plan too. So we have taken that into consideration. I believe it was several years ago we had a concept that we worked with USL, and we're working with them again just to carry on with that project. And part of that, like I said, will be the parking lot. So if we're unsuccessful, you will be seeing something that will be coming across the board to you.
Councillor Roberts?
For a period of time, maybe not still, the city of Banff or the town of Banff restricted people who owned a business from parking downtown. You could go to your business and drop stuff off or go by bicycle and take your bike in, but people who owned the business did not use the parking spaces because those were for tourists. I don't know if we'd ever be able to adopt something like that, but we'd all be parking up by Centennial Hall, I guess.
Thanks, Sandra. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the next column from the grant column is third-party funding. So council will recall that last year there was a project on Boundary where there was a couple of different third parties involved there. One being Tech, who installed some infrastructure under that road. And the other was the developer of the old school property there. So similar to those, these two projects, the first one there, the 302nd Ave, 303rd Street water main replacement. There's a portion of that directly benefits the proposed Kimberley Crossing development. So we've got an amount in there as a placeholder at this point in time, where we need to enter into a contribution agreement to formalize the amount, but we would anticipate that because of the direct benefit they were receiving from that project, that they would participate in the cost of it. Likewise with the Morrison sub PRV and kiosk construction, the cost of that includes a portion of the project that would directly benefit the proposed Legion track development. So similarly, at some point in time, we would negotiate and enter into a contribution agreement with them for their contribution to that project. Onto the,
Go ahead, Woody.
Yeah, I just had a question about those two. For those developments, are we able to enter into contribution agreements before the developments are approved? And what are we like, by making those agreements, are we kind of committing to allowing those developments to go forward? I'm just unfamiliar with the process.
yeah, I'm not sure where we're at in discussions with these two developers on these, but just as an example, the Boundary Street project that I referred to earlier, we asked both of those proponents to advance us the funds on those projects, just so that, you know, in the event that for whatever reason those projects didn't proceed, you know, we don't want to be spending taxpayers' money to do these projects without knowing that we've got the money set aside to pay for their portion of it. So you know, they're not going to be willing to put up the money unless they know that the project's going to proceed, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I just didn't know that the Legion track one was approved already, so that's why I was confused by seeing the money in that.
Yeah, and there's, you know, we're planning ahead on some of these projects as well. So you know, there is still some work ongoing for both of these projects, I believe.
So it's just in the budget is the
Yeah,
point.
yeah. No, I get that. I was just.
Yeah, so the next slide is talks about project planning. So in the last few years, the operations department has gotten really good at separating the design work from the actual construction work and including the design budget in the year preceding the construction. Because as noted in the slide here, the design on a lot of these projects, it helps inform the construction cost. So when you're doing the design and the construction in the same year, it just, you know, it's kind of the way it had been done previously, and you run into trouble where we're having to come back to council for more money to get the project done in that year. Whereas we can get the design done this year, it may change the cost, but we can talk about that in the deliberation of the next year's financial plan. So there's a number of projects that we have design work going on. Some of the design did commence in 22 is carrying over into 23. That Jim Ogilvie Way project is one example of that. I should mention as well, just for the benefit of the folks watching the YouTube video and maybe council as well. The staff that's in attendance here right now, the operations department is down one person right now. Our roads manager, we're currently recruiting for that position. So these guys are well versed in those projects as well, but just for the information of the public and newer members of the council as well. So on to the next slide, and we've talked a lot about this already, but the building condition assessments. So again, this is going to be a common theme. You're going to be hearing a lot more about these BCAs as we move forward here, and we really are quantifying what we all knew or suspected. With the other assets, pavement, water, and sewer, you know, we've got asset management planning documents that have undergone a process of, you know, they look at the condition assessment and that's how they prioritize the project. So that's now what's happening with these BCAs. Again, as noted by Lawrence in the presentation, we're not going to have the money to do all of these projects. In the 20 years, and this is really just a duplication of the information we saw in the presentation, but on these 5 facilities, there's $12.8 million worth of recommended investment over the next 20 years. In the next 5 years, there's $8.9 million worth. And as you can see in the second table there, we've got 3.4 million, just over 3.4 in the budget for the next 5 years. So, you know, we're well shy of what that BCA is saying that we should be spending. We've got what's been identified as the priority projects in the BCAs as requested by staff in 2023 and 2024. And we're really waiting on the results of that recreation facilities master plan to kind of help inform, just to give us a bit of a holistic picture here. And once we can meld the information from those 2 reports, make some decisions going forward on which facilities we need to be investing in. And in all likelihood, you're going to see some changes to the financial plan as presented as we get down the road a couple of years here.
So the funded amount then, just for clarification, Jim, for 2023 is $900,000.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's also some projects in non-capital as well. For example, in the Civic Center, there's another, I think it's $105,700. It's comprised of a bunch of projects, like a bunch of smaller projects. The smallest one I think is 3,000. The largest is 13,700. So just a bunch of little things that that BCA has identified need to be done in that facility. So there's some in the non-capital page in here as well for 2023. Any questions on? Talked about that quite a bit already. So the next slide is another one that I've added this year, just because there's been such a significant increase to the prior period's approved costs. So the adoption of the previous 5-year financial plan, I've listed some projects here that have been most affected by the inflationary increases. So, and we go through this exercise every year. So we adopt a 5-year financial plan every year. Council approves the projects in that plan for 5 years, but every year we go through an exercise of, the operations department does, of reviewing the costs in comparison to the current unit pricing for years 2 through 4 of that plan, or 2 through 5 of the plan. So through that exercise this year, you'll see some of these projects. The Jim Ogilvie Way, council approved a budget of $2.5 million in the previous 5-year financial plan. Through that exercise of comparing that cost with reference to current unit costs, it was increased by just about 66%. So $1.65 million, and new budget is $4.2 million on that. And we've got a number of examples of that.
Councilor McBain.
Yeah, just curious, you know, I appreciate a lot of these things would be based on unit cost, but Just given that a lot of the work is similar, maybe it would be helpful to elaborate a little bit more on some of the what looked like on a percentage basis or like the outliers, like the Alpine Crescent one. You know, that's a doing the math in my head really quick. There is about 115%.
Yeah, 133%.
Okay,
Yeah.
much better than me, the human calculator. Um, but yeah, so I'd just be curious to know, you know, where the discrepancy is when, you know, comparing similar projects.
I'm gonna defer to Shane on that one.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you, Councillor McBain. Yeah, so some of these we're seeing significantly higher inflationary increases than others. Alpine Crescent is a good example. We plan to line all the sanitary sewers in that area. And in lining, the resin that we use to do the lining has increased 300% this year. Yes. So some of those projects, we're seeing a lot higher increases in some of the materials than others. And with quite a bit of sewer in that area, that's why Alpine Crescent in particular has increased that much.
Oh, that answers that question. I appreciate that. And it was funny because that was the only thing I saw in there that was a discrepancy, difference between the two. So yeah, appreciate that.
So if I may, we're using the term inflationary in a very broad definition. And if I take a look at things like material shortages, if suddenly we had no material shortages, and in fact we had an overage of materials, that's going to have a material impact on what that unit cost is going to be. Similarly, some of the other areas. So, you know, chances are over the course of the next period of time, we're going to continue to see fluctuations, but not necessarily up. We may see some coming down. I guess I want to ask, we publish this. I mean, we've just increased these budgets by up to as much as 100%. We published the fact that we budgeted, in the case of Knighton, or in the case of Alpine, for example, the $800,000. What's to stop a particular contractor from looking at what the budget price is and saying, oh, this is the money they have to spend, and miraculously the tender prices come in at that? In other words, it's not really market driven. It ends up, you know, being driven by the money we have available. We have, this is a very broad question, but how do we protect ourselves against that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so we do a handful of things to try and lower the prices for ourselves. The designing a year ahead is a big help. We can work to minimize our risks in the projects, and especially in the last few years, tendering earlier in the year when the contractors are looking for more work, trying to fill their schedules.
A more competitive environment?
Exactly. We go out for a competitive bid on these projects. So ideally, if we can get out when more contractors are looking for projects, then we will get better pricing.
All right. Thanks for that, Shane. It's a tough environment, and you know, thanks for the vigilance that you guys show on this. Much appreciated.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
There's a comment about result in some projects having to be deferred. My question is, have the potentially deferred projects been removed from the budget, or are some of these going to be deferred?
We were able to keep everything within the 5-year plan that the operations department asked to have completed. We just had to bump some back further in the 5-year plan.
Okay.
So at first it was looking like we were going to have to actually pull some of the projects and put them outside of this plan, but
It's going to squeeze them in.
we squeezed them in, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And you're quite right, Mr. Mayor. The term inflationary increases, I mean, it's, I took these words from Shane, I believe, or a document that he put together. So the increases have primarily been driven by material shortages, high steel and oil prices affecting gas, asphalt, pipe, fitting prices, and high construction demand. And as noted by Shane, I mean, when you get 300% increases on certain components like the lining projects, this has been the the most challenging capital budget that I've worked on, not only here, but probably, you know, since I've been in the business. And it's just, we've just been chasing these prices all along. And we're really fortunate having the project manager on board, Shane, to, you know, focus on this stuff and keep an eye on the unit costs. It's really helped out. I do anticipate, we're all hoping that there's going to be some kind of an adjustment, that some of these components are going to start dropping again, or at least leveling off, because we can't sustain increases like this.
Councillor McBain?
Yeah, just to further to that, Jim, what are you seeing from your counterparts in other towns? I mean, are people dropping projects out? I mean, due to this type of work? I mean, is there a potential that, you know, one town's misery could be our benefit, just so to speak?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's everybody's scrambling these days. There are communities that are dropping projects from the plan for sure. I mean, we're fortunate that we were in the position we were with reserves. You know, the forecasted balances when we get out to the end of the 5-year plan on some of the reserves they're getting precariously low, to the point where I'm concerned. But you know, we'll keep an eye on that over the years and see how it changes. I mean, in this year alone, over the past year, so just this list of projects, and this isn't everything. You know, on the $9.3 million worth of projects we have listed here, there is an increase of $5.3 million, 57% just to those projects. I think of all the projects that were approved by council in the previous 5-year financial plan that had increases attached to them, I think it came in around $8 million. So yeah, it is a real challenge for sure. And if there isn't some kind of correction, as I note in the last sentence there, or if costs continue to go up, we're either going to have to start dropping projects, or we're going to have to increase taxes to bolster reserve contributions to keep getting projects done that we need to get done.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shane.
So the next slide here, I jump right into the full listing of the projects proposed in 2023. So there's just about $17 million worth here, and I'm not sure that it's worth going through each of these projects. The 2023 projects, for every one of the projects or pieces of equipment that I've got listed on here, there is a project sheet. This is the next section that provides what the budget was, the description, project rationale, the impact that project will have on operations, and how we're going to pay for it. So
did council have any specific questions on projects after having reviewed those project sheets? So if there are none tonight, as they come up and as you have a chance to review, you know, please bring them forward. Go ahead, Councillor Dunavac.
I guess I just have a question. I see lots of sewer and water upgrades here, and I just wonder if we have the ability, if all the product is the same dimensions throughout town, if we have the ability to maybe buy said material in bulk to help reduce the cost, knowing if we had some sort of footage or we knew how much we needed for said projects. If we bought in bulk, if we would have a better chance of maybe bargaining for a better price on said material.
Shane, can I call on you again on that one? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dunavac. We have done that in the past on some of our projects. We'll look at getting the materials done and ordered internally ahead of time. We need to be doing that on a project by project basis for sure, and usually within the same year. In situations where it is beneficial to do that, engineering, the operations team works closely with the utilities department to get anything that we can order ahead of time. Yeah.
Sure that.
Thank you.
So Go ahead, Woody.
I just had a question about the deferred projects, the projects that you deferred later into the 5-year plan. And I was curious whether when you were choosing projects to move, whether this, this 300%, for example, for the price of lining was taken into account on which projects were chosen. So for example, if you had higher inflation costs on a specific type of project, were those projects moved farther out and keeping, with the assumption that the shortage at some point would end, or you'd come up with a different plan that might be more financially feasible? Just a general question. That's probably for Shane.
Yeah, I'll lead into that and then I'll let Shane speak to it as well. A big part of the analysis, when we're going through and figuring out which projects needed to be deferred, was with reference to what we had in reserves to complete these projects. So as I talked about at the last meeting, we've kind of we've got 3 funds. So we've got a general fund, a water fund, and a sewer fund, and they each have reserves to fund these types of projects. The sewer fund was the most challenging. That's where we're most challenged, just with regards to the reserve balances there. So some of the projects, they were shuffled based on that, and some of them, like the Jim Ogilvie Way project, stayed up early in the 5-year financial plan. Just I believe largely because of just the condition assessment and where it's recommended in the asset management documents, but.
Yeah, like Jim said, where was feasible, we looked at moving projects in hopes that we will get better pricing in the future. A lot of these projects are connected to water, sewer, storm reserves, and road, as well as some being connected to development. So we do have constraints on when some of these projects can be done, but that was looked at, yes.
Good.
One thing I do want to mention, in the intro, I indicated that there are going to be changes as we move towards the May 15th deadline for adoption of the 5-year financial plan. For a variety of reasons, likely there will be some projects that are underway in 2022 that we won't get completed, so we'll have to carry those forward. There are some carry forwards identified on here already. Those are estimates right now based on what we think is going to be spent by the end of the year. So there'll be some tweaks there as well. Other things like council had a presentation at the last regular meeting about a proposed bike jump park. They were looking for some funding from the city. That wasn't referred by resolution to budget deliberations. I anticipate that it may be at some point in the future. So that projects like that, just because they're not identified in here, doesn't mean that by the time the bylaw is adopted, they won't be. If things like that come up, or we receive direction from council between now and that May 15th deadline, we'll work those into the plan, despite the fact that I'm asking for council's approval of these projects right now. So there's still opportunity to make some changes there.
Yeah, actually on that, it may be worthwhile to describe that process through the course of the year, exactly how that works.
Yeah, so
when something rears its head later on in the year that was not included in the budget, how does that work?
Yeah, so it's whenever something money related like that comes up, we've got, for example, a request from a community group to provide funding. It's from the finance department perspective, it's always best, especially at this point of the year, that council pass a resolution that it be deferred or referred to budget deliberations, just so we can look at it as part of this process. And even after the 5-year financial plan bylaw is adopted, the way the legislation is written, we can amend that bylaw at any time. But once it's adopted by bylaw, we have to adopt an amending bylaw to make that change. So it's at this point in time, we can just, shuffle the list, move things around in the bylaw prior to its adoption. But if something does come up through the course of the year for whatever reason, we can amend by bylaw.
Scott.
I think it's important too to remember that we as a council have yet to do strategic planning, and that could really have some impact and influence on, council's sort of receiving this budget tonight, and I appreciate your patience, and largely educational for some of you and overwhelming, I'm sure. But through the strategic planning process, you'll get to put your prints on the budget, and that could change it as well. So it's quite a process, especially in year one with new counselors, to hear what they want to do and to get caught up on what has been planned over the last few years. But it's I think Jim mentioned it's been a really challenging year. So what you're seeing tonight is inflationary and carryovers and sort of restructuring what years the projects are in. But obviously, it's up to council what the overall direction is, and we look forward to doing that in January, getting started, and hearing more from you on how you'd like to craft the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Scott. I mean, if you look, just flip to page 14 there where there's the first project sheet. In that little table up top there, we talk about council focus areas, and these relate to the focus areas that were identified by the previous council. So everything that council or the staff brings forward for proposed to be included in the capital or operating plans really needs to tie back into those focus areas. So once we go through that strategic planning process, you know, that really should be the filter that all the capital projects are looked at through. And if some of the stuff that's in the list here doesn't jive with what those areas are as identified by the new council, then we can certainly reconsider. Again, the reason this is coming before council right now is so that some of the bigger projects like the Jim Weavy Way, we can get approval for those revised budgets so that we can get the tenders out and get that stuff done. Okay, so unless there's a lot of information here, and I hope that everybody had a chance to look at it. In behind these project sheets, I do, similarly to the 2023 list of capital projects, I list each year 2024 to 27 as well for the capital, and then the non-capital as well. And the differentiation there is that capital projects result in the addition of an asset to the city's balance sheet, whereas the non-capital stuff is really just a one-time project. It's typically you know, a maintenance related item, or maybe a service that we've hired a consultant to undertake, that type of thing. So doesn't result in a new asset that we keep in the shop or that we're installing underground. It's just really smaller work, maintenance work. But all of that information is listed there, and if council has questions on any of that stuff, either now or as we revisit this stuff later on in the plan, please jot that stuff down, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. But if there are no further questions, Councillor McBain.
I can tell you, wrapping it up, Jim, and I just wanted to say I really appreciate the level of effort. I give you kudos all the time for how digestible you make your reports, and all of staff really too. I'm seeing a lot more. We're being more proactive, I think, this year, and it's gonna allow us to maybe be a little more nimble in a challenging year. And it is a lot, and you've explained it really well. It's very transparent, and I really appreciate it, because it is going to be a challenge this year for sure. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate those comments. I mean, that is the goal with this type of stuff. It's, you know, we're talking massive dollars here, dozens of projects. It's all about just trying to present it despite the fact that this thing is 86 pages long. I'm hoping it's presented in a way that, you know, you can sit down and flip through it and understand what it's all about. The information that's in the project descriptions, I mean, I think that's gotten a lot better over the years as well. The operations guys, all the managers have done a really good job this year of giving a lot more detailed information, not only with regards to the project description, but the rationale for the projects as well. Like a lot of the projects where we could, the operations department has provided reference to the asset management documents. Like we've got an integrated infrastructure capital plan that prioritizes our capital over the next 20 years, and they referenced that project, the number that's in that document. So that might not be very helpful for council, but it's helpful for staff as we're going through that stuff. We can reference back to the asset management documents, and just like to thank the managers for putting in all the work to get the information that fed this document. So
The way we're going through this process now is going to ensure that we don't end up in situations where we've got facilities that are at 17 or 20%. The same thing with all of our asset classes as part of the infrastructure. We use data to make these decisions now, and we are really a light year ahead of where we were even a short number of years ago. And I want to reinforce the comments that were made that great job, guys. We're pretty confident that we're on the right track here.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. So unless there's any other specific questions for myself or the managers, the second resolution there regarding direction to approve these projects for inclusion in the 23 to 27 plan.
Yeah, so we have two resolutions that we'll deal with independently. The first is that council approve the projects and their associated budgets as detailed in the capital and non-capital plan as presented. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Cairns moves and Councillor Roberts seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That motion is carried. And secondly, that council directs staff to prepare an amendment to year 2 of the 2022-2026 5-year financial plan bylaw to include the 2023 capital projects and their associated budgets as detailed in the report. Councillor McBain moves and Councillor Maguire seconds. Further discussion? All those in favor? That motion is carried. Awesome. Oh, the original motion, to receive. So we've done resolutions within the resolution. The original resolution on the floor was to receive the report, which we have done. All those in favor? That motion is carried.
Sorry for pushing you forward there.
Yeah,
Thank you,
that's
council.
all right. Councillor McBain moves adjournment. Councillor Maguire seconds. All those in favor? Awesome. That motion is carried. Thanks, staff, for being here. Much appreciated. And to residents who have tuned in, thanks for being here. Thanks for coming.